and I wanted to speak about interfaith peacemaking and peace building during troubled times. So I have been involved with interfaith work for a very long time. I first got involved with the peace movement after I got to go to Tibet the summer before my senior year in college. So I got to spend 4 weeks in Nepal living with Tibetan refugees and 3 weeks in Tibet, traveling around, learning a lot about Tibetan Buddhism, meditating, and learning a lot about the Tibet-China conflict. And my original reason for signing up to do that semester over there, learning about this, was because I was very interested in Buddhism. I've been studying Buddhism, and for a time, as I believe I've mentioned in the past, I sort of practiced three faiths. I grew up Roman Catholic. I practiced that, and then I also at some point picked up Buddhism and was meditating weekly and practicing Buddhism, and also going to synagogue with my then boyfriend on Friday nights. And so my life was interfaith before I even knew that that was a thing. So on Sundays, I'd go to Mass. On Wednesdays, I'd practice with my Buddhist Sangha. And on Friday nights, I'd go to synagogue. But then I ended up going into this program to learn more about Buddhism and learn so much about the Tibet-China conflict that I was just horrified about the situation and everything that was happening to the Tibetan people and all the devastation that was happening there. So when I came back from that trip, I decided I wanted to work in peacemaking, international peacemaking in some way. And this was back in 2005. So I started going to peace rallies, was going to college in Maryland, so it wasn't far from Washington, D.C. And this is also around the time the U.S. was at war in Iraq and Afghanistan. So I would go to D.C. on the weekends and go to peace protests against the Iraq war and all kinds of peacemaking when they had them, things on behalf of the Tibetan people. And I wanted that to be the work that I did. And eventually I met Rabbi Mark Gopin, who's done a lot of high-level negotiation work between Israel and Syria. And he said, unfortunately, there isn't a lot of work in Tibet, China, because it's so difficult to deal with the Chinese government. However, if you want to study Arabic and Hebrew, there is a lot of work to be done in Israel and Palestine. And so I decided to do that for some silly reason. And so I started studying Arabic, and he told me about this group, the Compassionate Listening Project. At this point, this was back in 2008. And so I ended up taking 2 semesters worth of Arabic and then going on a compassionate listening delegation in 2008. And the idea with compassionate listening is you meet with all different kinds of people. They used to also go into Gaza, but since 2006, they couldn't get permission to go into Gaza. So when I was traveling, we would go spend equal time in Israel and the West Bank, meet with equal numbers of Israelis and Palestinians from all walks of life, some of whom were already doing dialogue work together, and some of whom literally would say, I want all the people on the other side to be killed. So there's a wide range of the kind of people we'd meet and their backgrounds and ages and where they were and what they want to do. And then the question we'd ask them is, how has the conflict impacted your life? And we'd listen to them speak for anywhere from 20 minutes to an hour, depending on how much they wanted to talk. And then we'd ask these deepening questions, and we'd practice compassionate listening with them. And the goal was to kind of help understand where they were, how they were feeling, and kind of try to get them to a place that they'd be willing to meet and work with people on the other side, and then try to connect them with people on the other side. And I remember we'd have some folks who'd be like, well, I'm a reasonable person, but everyone on the other side, they're terrible. They're all monsters, and there aren't any good ones. Be like, what? We know a few good ones. Would you like to meet one? And occasionally they'd be like, okay, fine. And so we'd introduce them to some. And we had some people I called like our fuzzy Israelis and Palestinians who were like the nicest people in the world. And so we'd bring them first, right? You want to bring like the nicest one, to try to. And then I remember this happened at least once. I had someone who's like, well, fine. I like that one, but that's the only good one. And we're like, but that one has a friend. And then you bring like the second nicest one, And slowly over time, you kind of wear people down. I used to joke it's like a peace pyramid scheme. It's like an MLA, like you get your friend involved and they get their friends involved, and like you slowly try to develop peace like that. And so we do that. So we actually have several cases of people, some of whom started out terrible. One of the people who I worked with in the beginning said every person in Gaza should be killed. And so part of our work in compassionate listening was how do you regulate your own emotions? Because I have feelings about that. And but I want to connect with this person enough that I can try to show them that's not true. And so it's this weird thing you do where you can't say you're a monster because that just makes them dig in their heels more. And you can't say, here's all the facts that prove you're wrong, because that doesn't work psychologically. That just makes someone get more defensive. So we do compassionate listening. So, like, one of the tricks is like, wow, that's really hard for me to hear. I'm wondering, did you always feel that way? What is it that makes you feel that way? Are you sure there aren't any good people? What about the little children? Like, surely the little children. There's this peacemaker. Have you heard of this one peacemaker? Have you heard of this one person? And trying to slowly, it's a weird thing because you're not, I try to say, you're not exactly trying to make people be different than they are, but you're trying to get them to their heart space or like who you hope people are when they start out, when they're born. Hopefully, we're not all born with this hatred and loathing of other people. So I don't want to fundamentally make the people we meet with be like entirely different people, but I do want them not to want everyone else to be killed. So I am trying to change people when I'm doing this, but to get them back to that. And we have this idea of like we're all born in this kind of heart, like loving, open, joyful, curious space. And then as we get hurt and as we like absorb propaganda and we get defensive, we kind of build this castle wall around ourselves. And it's in that castle wall space that we say things like every person in Gaza should be killed, or every person in Israel needs to be killed. What happened in the Holocaust, it didn't go far enough, which is another thing I've heard. And so you hear these really awful things. But you can't just say you're a monster. So how do you work with people like this? So we spend some of the time working with people who are like that, and other times working with people who are far more reasonable, but who are really hurt and who say, well, I'm really well-meaning, but I don't know. It doesn't feel like there's any hope. And so we would travel around and try to develop these relationships. And so I did that, and then I'd come back. So I'd spend time in Israel and Palestine doing that, and then I'd come back and I teach about the conflict, and then have all the blowback about that. Because I don't know if you all have noticed this, but conflict's a bit controversial. So Lord help you, you try to speak about it in public, you'll get every insane thing you've ever heard thrown at you. So it's a lot. It is not an easy line of work. But I was doing all of that. I tried to write a book about the Israel-Palestine conflict. I picked 12 things that they were fighting about, and I tried to write it as an imaginary dialogue between a reasonable Israeli and a reasonable Palestinian. And I footnoted it extensively, like 60 footnotes per chapter, with like actual facts, and tried to show that both groups have made innumerable unhelpful decisions, and here are the different ways that people are suffering. But I would have my characters concede if certain things were bad and together try to come up with something better. And I did that until I got too depressed about it because the situation is very depressing. And so I made it through 4 of the 12 chapters. And I also started to realize that we almost live in a post-fact world where people don't care. Like I would send these to people and I would have 60 footnotes with like reports from the World Bank and from the UN and from these refugee organizations and like things about water and like these really like true things, and people don't care. And it got very depressing. And so after devoting about 6 years of my life completely to the Israel-Palestine conflict, I stopped and I kind of never wanted to talk about it again, ever. And so I switched to interfaith. And so my reason for getting so into interfaith was it's another way of bringing people together. Why it doesn't require going to the Middle East. It doesn't result in the kind of trauma that you get. I have post-traumatic stress disorder from some horrible, violent things that happened when I was in the Middle East. And I've spent years in therapy dealing with that. And interfaith is, in a more general way, is a happier way of doing that. And so I've been doing that since that time. And then October 7th happened. And it became really hard to never talk about Israel-Palestine again. And so, yes, so it's been very hard. So after October 7th, when Hamas broke out of Gaza and attacked and killed, what is it, around 13 to 1400 Israelis, and took hostage about another 240 to 250 of them, and brought them back into Gaza. Suddenly, everywhere around me, everyone wanted to talk about Israel-Palestine all the time. And many, many people know that I have a background there. And so suddenly they were asking me constantly, could you speak at this rally? Could you attend this event? Could you speak on this panel? Could you write this thing? Could you read these things? What do you think about this? As I was completely inundated with Israel-Palestine stuff again. And I had a good 12 days where I woke up every day in a panic attack. And it basically resurfaced all my PTSD symptoms. And I was like, oh my gosh, like I haven't wanted to do this in years. Like now I feel like I have no choice. And so I went back and I did more EMDR. And then I took a sabbatical, which was really good. And but then in January, I also work at a church, the Canadian Memorial United Church, which also has the Center for Peace. And one of the things we've been doing is a visioning process with the board. And people said, we really want to use our Center for Peace to do peacemaking. And lo and behold, I'm someone who's done international peacemaking for years, and my office is literally in the Center for Peace. And our name doesn't even have the word church in it. And I'm not Christian or Jewish or Muslim. I'm actually Buddhist, which has always been really helpful for doing peacemaking, because when I would travel in the Middle East, people would right away say, wait a minute, what religion do you belong to? And I'd say, actually, I'm Buddhist. And that was like a free pass because no one has a problem with Buddhists. So I could get in and kind of meet with anybody. And so suddenly at the church where I work, they said, okay, you're the Israel-Palestine expert. You work at the Center for Peace. Go do peacemaking. And so I was like, okay, crap. I guess I'm doing Israel-Palestine again. So that's what I've been doing. So, but it's actually gotten better. So it started in January. I formed a little working group with Rabbi Laura Duhan Kaplan, who I've worked with extensively, who's been here before, who's amazing, and Shadia Kubti, who's Palestinian Christian. And we needed a Muslim partner. And trying to find a Muslim partner who lived nearby and who had the time and interest in doing an interfaith adventure with us took some time, but eventually we got together with Haroon Khan, who is the director of Al Jamia, Al Masjid Al Jamia, here in Vancouver, which is the oldest mosque in BC. And so the four of us have a little interfaith team. And so the original plan was, we said, because of how all of our holidays are lining up this year, what if we did something? And this was actually my colleague, Reverend Jeff Rock's idea. It hasn't come together that way, but other stuff's happened that I'll tell you about. He said, what if we do something where we do an interfaith iftar together, and we invite Jews, Muslims, and Christians, and we all have an iftar for Ramadan. And 2 weeks later, we have a Monday, Thursday service with the Christian community. And Jeff and I do a foot washing, and we invite everyone to the Center for Peace for a foot washing. And 2 weeks later, we have an interfaith Passover Seder, as we've done in the past. And we invite everyone for the Seder. And that way we do the kind of stuff we do here, where we take turns, but we all celebrate everything together. And Haroon said, okay, I could do that. But he said, I can't in good conscience bring Palestinians and Muslims together if we're not going to address Israel-Palestine right out of the gate. So we ended up organizing a roundtable discussion on the conflict as our first event, which I found completely terrifying, because Haroon was bringing the Muslim and Palestinian group, and the rest of us, we were bringing the Christian and Jewish group, and they hadn't met each other yet. So this is a lot of what I used to do, where you try to find the people who you think will want to meet with people on the other side, who maybe at the first meeting won't say all those people need to die. So how do you so you have a great many meetings with people to try to figure out who could possibly come together and be interested in working together. And so we did. So about a little more than 2 weeks ago, we had an interfaith roundtable discussion on the conflict, and Haroon and Rabbi Laura went on the radio, CBC, and talked about it. And Haroon said, this is a genocide, in the radio, and that resulted in a lot of blowback, because there are a great many words that, even if they're true, that if you say them about the conflict, you will get infinity letters and infinity people visiting and protesting and angry at you. And for my own work that I've done and trying to teach, I've just learned to step over every landmine that you can find to try to convey the same information without using the words that result in the infinity amounts of blowback. But so there was a lot going in. So we were worried there might be a counter protest before our event even got started. But I don't know if people just couldn't find the building or what, but thankfully we did not have that. And instead we had a really good discussion about the conflict. And the way it worked is people didn't talk about the facts as much. They talked about how they themselves are suffering, how their families are suffering, the direct things that are happening to them. And rather than talking about the political part of it, and it almost became like a listening session. And Dorley got to attend, and Zunera, our marketing manager, was there and recorded a bunch of it. We recorded the whole thing. We had 19 speakers. It was really beautiful. And we ended up having our member of parliament in Kitsilano, Talib Nur Muhammad, was there to witness this. And it actually went really well. And one of the Jewish speakers said afterwards, I was sitting next to one of the Palestinian speakers, who's a main organizer here. And he said it was so interesting because some of the stuff that person's organized, I've understood as just completely being wanting to destroy me and my people. And then hearing his stories and how his family's suffering, it made me realize it's not like that. I hold this in a different way now that I've heard his story. And this was really beautiful. And so then 4 days later, my colleague Jeff and I were going to a different iftar that was also an interfaith event, another way to bring people together. And as I was driving, our colleague Haroon called me 4 times in a row. And I was feeling quite annoyed about why are you calling repeatedly? And so I parked the car and I answered and I said, what do you want? And he said, do you want to meet the prime minister? And I was like, wait, I think I'm being stupid. Do you mean Justin Trudeau? And he said, yes, I mean Justin Trudeau. And so the prime minister was in town and it was going to meet with the Jewish community and wanted to meet with the Muslim community. And at El Jamia, it's a small mosque, and they said it was difficult to set it up. So Talib Nur Muhammad, our member of parliament, who'd been at our roundtable discussion, thought it went so well. He said, why don't we do it again and invite the prime minister? And so then I basically worked for 48 hours straight and to set it all up. But we managed to get 150 Jews, Muslims, and Christians together in one room without any fistfights breaking out. And we, folks from different faiths, shared a bit about their faith. And we prayed together and broke the fast and started eating. And Justin Trudeau came and he went person to person. And he met every single person and shook hands with every person. And there were a great many Palestinians there who were sharing sometimes with a lot of emotion about what they're experiencing and what he's not doing. And he listened. I don't have any idea what the impact will be, but he listened to every single person. And he listened to people in the Jewish community who talked about the refugees. One of the people who came lost 8 friends on October 7th. 8 of his friends were killed by Hamas. And they all got to meet with Trudeau. We all got to meet with Trudeau. And I'm going to share a few photos from that. See, it's not only badness. There is some good stuff. And so here's part of our planning group. So it's some of our friends. Rabbi Laura is in there. Shadi is in there. Haroon, my colleague Jeff and I with Talib Nur Muhammad and some of our other interfaith peacemaking friends. And happily, and the thing I get most excited about is those people want to work with each other now. Several of them have said, hey, you know what? We actually have more in common than we thought. We can work together. So they're starting to do stuff outside of the things our original group is planning. And here are just some pictures from the event. And this is one of my favorite photos. This is Haroon holding hands with Rabbi Laura and Reverend Sandra Nixon of Trinity Grace United Church, showing that it's possible for Jews, Muslims, and Christians to come together in peace. And here's Rabbi Laura talking to Justin Trudeau. And here he is talking to one of our Palestinian participants. And we managed, this is Haroon and we managed to all come together in peace. And so what I'm seeing is a lot of folks after October 7th who kind of retreated into their respective camps and who said, okay, you know what? No one else cares about my people. I have to protect my people. But people sort of did that and everyone went to their respective camps. And it was very difficult. And it was honestly, this has been the worst time I've ever seen for interfaith organizing in the entire time I've been doing it. But what I'm seeing now is people who don't want to stay in those camps who are seeing that that's not helpful. And so they're starting to emerge. So there's actually a lot of interest in trying to come together and trying to find things we can do together that are helpful. So, for instance, at that event, one table had women who are Jewish, Muslim, and Christian who said, you know what, let's start a women's group together and we can invite our friends. We can do it MLA style, right? So, we're going to start a women's group that we're going to organize to bring people together. And one of the Palestinian speakers teaches about anti-Palestinian racism, which is focused on the idea that all Palestinians are terrorists. And she said, you know what? I met Rabbi Laura and some of these other Jewish organizers, and we can teach about anti-Palestinian racism and anti-Semitism together because those have some of the same roots. And if we do it together, we can get further. And we saw several other groups. Actually, Haroon today, his group is holding the annual Ramadan food drive on the downtown east side. And he said, if you want, we can make this interfaith and we can have folks from other communities come and we can all hand out food together. And so there is a lot of interest in working together, but it has to be the way it used to be when I was doing it before, is if you yourself want to work together, you have to reach out, do the scary work of reaching out and finding the other people. But there are, I promise 100%, there are people in every community that want to work together. So you find the people that want to work together and you don't spend the whole time arguing about political things and trying to make sure you agree about everything 100%. You find the people that want to work together and you figure out what you can do together. And then you invite people in your respective circles. And so it's been the worst time it's ever been for interfaith, but it's also really exciting because there is a lot of interest in coming together and doing some of these joint programs that will benefit everybody, that will really be helpful. So I just want to assure you that we can get through this. And I'm so grateful the sanctuary for kind of holding steady during all this time and kind of freeing me up to do some of this other work. And I just also want this to be a kind of commissioning. So you all have been doing interfaith for a long time at this point. So please feel free to go out and find those other people because the world needs more of that right now. We need more unity and more hope and more collaboration than ever. So thank you for listening and good luck in your work ahead.